Hi, my name is Marisa Z and I'm a filmmaker. I've been working in film for 33 years and I'm going to be talking today about a project I'm making at the moment called New England House, New England 22. Rather than do a paper, Katrina McPherson and I, who have known each other for many years, we've been having conversations and realised that there are some convergences in where we are in our lives just now and where we are in our filmmaking just now. So rather than do the published advertised paper, I hope we won't be disappointing you by having a conversation about the work and the themes that it suggests.
Great. So it's a kind of two-parter. You may have noticed, because you've been learning by heart the programme, that tomorrow morning I'm doing a paper, so we're going to do a similar thing tomorrow. So today the focus is mainly on Marisa's most recent project. And Marisa, I'd like you to start by talking and telling us about your most recent project.
So the project I'm working on at the moment is called New England House, New England 22. It's a commission. I live in Brighton. I'm from Glasgow in Scotland, and I live in Brighton in the UK. When I first got to Brighton, I think it was, 15 years ago or something. It's a really pretty place. It's near the sea. It had at that time a green, kind of ecologically conscious council. It has beautiful little lanes with bijou shops, and I really hated it. Because I just didn't understand it. I didn't understand what the industry was. I didn't understand as a city. You know, it isn't really a city. I couldn't really get that. But on one of my kind of many walks away from all those beautiful places, I chanced upon a building. And it was an industrial building, an 8-storey industrial building, which is called by pretty much everyone in Brighton the ugliest building in Brighton. And I completely fell in love with it, and I immediately sort of knew that I'd found my home and that I wanted to be in there in whatever way. Because I'd found out it was a building that rented space to small businesses, to tech businesses, to artists, to bakery, to engineers. And I thought, I've got to find a way to get in there, and it took me 13 years to get there. So as soon as I got in there, what I didn't know about it was it has very wide corridors. And I immediately just started making films in there. I immediately started taking stills, which I'd never really done before, and started really immersing myself in that community. It's also like 5 minutes from my house, and the area that I live in is a gentrifying area. I'm part of that gentrification. I moved there when I had a university job, which I don't have anymore. It's an area which is really changing. It's not that diverse. It's economically diverse. It's changing very rapidly. At the moment, there's an 18-storey student accommodation block being built, which has been built. It's kind of rising every week. It gets taller and taller. It's the area's changed a lot in the last sort of 13 years that I've been there. So I'm kind of really immersed in that world. I'm being commissioned by Brighton Council They were kind of to make a film, really, to sort of do an investigation, to help them understand more the community of my building and the community that surrounds it. And they've kind of agreed and accepted that it's not going to be a kind of traditional documentary in any way, but they are very interested in this idea that I would bring something to this investigation that will open up a way of thinking about space and potentially regeneration to them that they don't know about. The other thing to say is that New England House itself is being redeveloped, which is obviously the scariest thing to happen to any kind of building that you like, because invariably they always end up much worse than they were before. They can't just fix the roof, they always have to build a cafe or something that you don't need. So I'm kind of, and the community of New England House is very worried about that. So I'm using various different strategies to kind of discover what's going on and what there is and what there could be there as well. So it's a very different kind of project. in terms of my development, I mean, I started making poetic documentaries in 2015 after years of making, I mean, I kind of move in between dance film and also drama films. I write drama as well, so I'm kind of moving in between those two places. So in this project, I'm using a lot of different sorts of strategies to make sort of cinematic discoveries.
Great. And so could you, just before we watch a clip of one of the films you've made in New England House, or around New England House, could you just dig down a little bit deeper into what you think in your practice has come from your background as a movement artist and as a choreographer and as a filmmaker? What are those strategies that you're using?
So I'd say firstly, as a director, I'm really looking for the magical in the everyday, and sometimes that's the magical or the fantastical that I will stage, and sometimes it's the magical or fantastical that I just find. I know I'm kind of there to find it. And part of that comes from a background as a performer, and also of watching a lot of work, or watching a lot of dance and theatre, but specifically choreographically, and not just choreographically, but I suppose in a sense of embodiment. Like, I'm really looking at, for example, the movement around the building, the movement in the building. So I was describing this to Katrina the other night, and I was saying, well, I'm really interested in the movement of couriers that come into the building, the movement of pigeons and seagulls around the building, the movement of the community that's around the building, the drug sellers that kind of hang out there, the movement of people in the corridors, but the movement up through the building. So I've started to make this gesture, these kind of gestures. So it's very much a kind of idea of architecture as choreography, and choreography within architecture, and choreography within the urban environment, and the choreography and choreographies of communities. The other aspect of my practice, I suppose, that comes from my background as a dancer and as a choreographer, and at some moments in my life as a screen dance artist, is to do with embodiment. And I've worked with large crews. For this project I'm being a self-shooter. I guess I like to spend a long time reading a space, and reading it through being there and through moving in it, or sometimes just standing in it. And I think Omari reminded me of something the other day that I think I said in a workshop like 1 billion years ago, which is imagining that the space is sentient. So imagining this space is something alive to you, and that you're within that space, but you're not the main person in that space. It's got its body, it's got its consciousness. So I'm always trying to tap into those things and make images that tap into those things, and record sounds that tap into those things. So sound is a big deal in New England House because it has very echoey corridors, and it has very echoey lift shafts. There's quite a lot of ghost sounds, there's quite a lot of ghost presences. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it's beautiful, and actually, particularly when you gestured, because I think that's what really struck me. So that's the problem of doing a double-hander. Yeah, absolutely. And particularly, as you say, in the gesture and spending time in the space and reading the space in that way. I wonder if now we should watch your first clip.
Yeah.
We're just going to look at 2 minutes of a film that you introduced it while I pressed go.
So this is New England House 21, and it's a very different kind of proposition, but it was I had access to a very big office space in there for about 3 months. Somebody I know was just moving into it. So I made a film. I spent a long time in there. So I'm just going to show that. It's very different what I'm going to make, but it has a relationship to it. I'm just going to show 2 minutes of this. So that's. I think the other part of my practice that comes out of my relationship to dance and choreography is improvisation, and I'm improvising always when I'm editing, and I quite often will return to a work. So that's 2 New England houses. I made several versions of them with different grades and slightly different edits, so I kind of smooshed those 2 together just for this event. Because I was kind of interested to see what it would look like in a square format. The other thing I would say is that I have made really specific, I'm very interested in spatial contexts for screenings, and these things have been made very specifically for mobile phone or building because of that aspect ratio, but that's made for something else. I don't really know what that device is.
There's 2 just points I'd love to just draw you out on there. I mean, I'd like to go back to this idea of you self-shooting. So, because I realise that's something you're more recently doing, is filming your own work, and maybe how that impacts on how you are working a little bit more. But I'm also really wanting to pick up on you talking about editing as an improvised process or practice. Because I think there's problems inherent in that, and I'd be lovely to hear what you feel about that. So maybe start with the cinematography and how you're working with that, and then move into the improvisation in editing.
With cinematography, I've worked with a lot of really fantastic cinematographers. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you really don't have the money. But I always work with an editor. Apart from when I don't work with an editor. I always work with the same editor when I work with an editor. I've been working with him for about 20 years, and I've really learned so much from him. When I started, just before the pandemic, I had a little bit of money, and I said, oh God, I think I'm going to shoot it myself. And he went, look, you should, just do it. So I had a camera, a little Sony A7, and started to really learn about photography, and I really enjoyed that as a process. So it's a really deep part of my process now, and whilst I will work with a cinematographer again for this project, in particular for New England, it's a 3-month shoot. I kind of have to be there, so I'm doing it. That's what I'm doing, and I really love it. So I've really got a process now of spending a long time taking stills, and for that project that you just saw, I took a lot of stills of myself. For this new project that you're going to see, I'm taking a lot of stills of other people. With regards to cinematography, I'm absolutely adoring learning the tech and really going, actually, I can do this. And for any women out there who are going, I'm not technical, just spend the time, man, Like, it'll take you a while, but spend the year learning the course online, read the manual, do all that stuff, because it's not a mystery. It really, really isn't.
And can I jump in specifically there? Because one of the things I loved that you were talking about when we were having our discussions was talking about prime lenses and what they bring to your actual practice. So could you touch on that a little bit as well?
The first lens I got with my camera is a prime lens, so that means, for those of you that don't know, it has no zoom, and I've just continued with that. A month ago, I did some work for somebody, and they wanted me to shoot on their cameras, which had zoom lenses, and I was a bit like, oh no, I hate this. And the thing with prime lenses, which is so brilliant, is you've got to make a decision and stick with that decision. So the making of that decision is a real compositional kind of moment. And the sticking with that decision, you really do have to be quite brave, because sometimes, especially with longer shots, there's a real tension in that. And I guess there's something about that which relates to ideas of performance, because I'm always looking in my directing for finding the best performance from everybody, from the people on the screen, but also the crew. And when you're working with a prime lens, when you're working with any sort of aspect of those cinematographical things, you really got to be on it, because the first big film I made was on film, so it was a ratio of 3:1. You had three opportunities to get it right, so you had to get it right. With the digital stuff that I'm doing just now, I can shoot for hours, which I'm now going to stop because it's a really bad call. You've got hours of stuff, but the prime lens thing, it's about making choices and being really confident, and being confident that you know what you want your viewer to see.
And for us, that's one of the ways that we see, although our practice is so very different, that's really certainly one of the coming together points. I'm also a cinematographer, And I see, and some people will know, I see the prime lens or any choice of lens as almost like a score, and you go with that score, and then that opens up potentials. And so it's really interesting to hear Marisa talking about coming to that from a slightly different perspective. And I thought it was so fascinating watching that clip, actually, because you just talked about space, and I felt so much that in that version of New England House, we were all there in the centre of the space, but that through your framing, I don't know about everyone else, but I was really identifying with the performer, and in a sense empathetic towards him. I felt like that was my experience of the space. So very different from what you were talking about in terms of movement around the space. So I wondered, do you want to get the stills up? Because I realise I don't know which ones you want.
And they're tiny.
So this is from your most recent work that you're currently working on. Yeah.
So I probably should show you a picture of New England House. We'll find one in a minute. But what Katrina said there, New England 21 was very much about looking out from the building to the area around it. And in some ways, it's quite a psychological reality piece. It's a pandemic piece. And quite often when I was in the building looking out, there was nobody on the streets. What is so fantastic about this new iteration, this next film, New England 22, is it's really about meeting people in the corridors, and it's about the community outside. One of the things that I guess characterises a lot of the films I've made is an idea of myth and mythical, and of kind of meeting people and finding or presenting them as kind of mythical, as bigger, as living in a kind of heightened reality. The people that you're seeing here now are Ben Mack and his assistant Matilda. So this is a guy he makes costumes for Drag Race. So I've interviewed quite a few people in the last month. So I've interviewed a toolmaker, I've interviewed a jeweller, I've interviewed the bakery, and then I bumped into this guy outside, and somebody said, "Oh, you should interview him." And he said, "Yeah, come up to my studio," and it was just like an atelier for drag costumes. Hooray! Found it, man. Him and his assistant, Katrina, could you just see if you could find the next thing?
Yep.
The interesting thing with them was this, I met them in the corridor, and I was saying to Doug earlier, one of the things that one of the guiding principles of this has been, there was a 40s paparazzi photographer called Ouija, and somebody said, "What's the secret of your amazing photographs?" And he said, F8 and be there. And it's really stayed with me because, for lots of reasons, it's fun and all the rest of it, but you kind of have to be there, and you have to be brave and just take the still and try not to worry too much about it. But you also have to be prepared to take the still. I bumped into these guys, and I just love these because they really, those people, they think they live in a film in real life. They really, really do. So I graded it to look a little bit 60s, and kind of, I really like this it's got a little bit of a silent film. He's so dynamic. So I guess I'm kind of looking for these moments in this film. There's a couple of other stills I'll show as well.
I'm going to jump in though, Marisa, partly because we only have 9 minutes left. So I think according to what we're meant to do, we're going to open up to questions, and I'm sure people have got lots of questions, so it's been really fascinating. Thank you. So do people have questions for Marisa? Doug?
So if you don't mind, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the word that comes to mind in a lot of the images and the things that you're talking about is liminality. This image is very much a liminal image. Ouija wouldn't take this shot necessarily, right? But the shots of the buildings and the sort of in-between spaces, is that something at all that you could address?
Did people hear that? Okay.
I'm just going to say what Doug asked me, right? Is that a good way to do it?
Yeah.
So he said the thing that comes to his mind when he sees this image is liminality and the idea of in-between spaces. It's not a paparazzo picture. So he said, does liminality figure in your plans or your making of this work? And I would say, yeah, absolutely, because I'm in that building at 4:30 in the morning when there's no one there in the corridors, and I'm there at 4:30 in the morning outside the building, and For me, the ugliest building in Brighton takes on this. I can't take a bad photo of that building. I keep taking a photo and it just looks beautiful, maybe just to me. But there's something about trying to find those liminal spaces or those liminal states, I suppose, those in-between states where you think you might be in a film or you're taking a moment outside of your daily life. Does that answer?
Nice.
I think part of why, I'm observing, like, part of why you might be so drawn to this oddity of a building is that you're an outsider yourself and you don't have this nostalgia for Brighton. How has it been for you working in a different country, in a different community, and sort of being an outsider yourself?
That's such a great question.
Repeat the question.
So the question is, perhaps part of the reason that you're drawn to this building is because you're an outsider in Brighton. How is it to... Sorry, say it again?
Like being an outsider yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that question. I guess I belong there because New England House is full of people who are a little bit outside of things. There's a guy that makes like original synthesizers, like 70s synthesizers. There's a guy that's been making wind turbines for 30 years who I interviewed him 2 weeks ago, and he just went, yeah, I'm quids in, because everybody thought I was mad, but now I'm like the most successful businessman in Brighton. You know, and for me there's something about, it's about the architecture, isn't it? The person that I was going to give an academic paper about is the Syrian architect Marwa Al-Sabouni, who's currently director of Brighton Festival. And she has written a lot about the destruction of her hometown homes, and she's written a lot about the responsibilities of town planning and architecture in relation to conflict, and also the different ways communities have resisted gentrification and urbanisation. And I guess for me in New England House, I looked at it and I just saw Glasgow, and I also saw industry, and felt that I had somehow a place in that as an artist, which is perhaps, yeah, good.
I think we've got time for one more question. See, is that Gabri?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
More of a remark. We have an open long table. I would love to have this wiki lens turning to shooter conversation.
You'd love to have
I'd love to have the conversation later on about being a shooter in your own work, or similar to what I've been doing, and just exchange ideas, lenses, embodiment. What do you bring from being a director?
We're gonna pick up on some of that tomorrow in part 2.
Okay.
Cunning plan, and then absolutely, totally, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. One more teeny, like half a question then, because that was a.
Can we see an outside photo of
Oh,
the building?
oh yeah, sure.
So the question that was asked is, can they see the outside of the building?
Thank you, sorry.
And another question while you're...
Yes, go for it. Yeah.
Any surprises so far in your shooting and exploration of the building?
So, Claudia just asked Marisa if there were any surprises when you were filming and shooting in the building or around the building.
The building never stopped surprising me, but the first day that I went in with my camera was a Saturday afternoon, and I purposely went in because I was going to take some stills of the corridors because there's never been anybody there on a Saturday. And I went up in the lift and heard this incredible sound. And I was on level 8. I've got a little clip of it, but I think we've got time. I'll show you another time. Anyway, there was a guy playing a harmonium and 2 women singing plain song in the corridor. So I couldn't see them, I could hear them, and I turned the corner and there they were. And he'd found a harmonium in the street and had stuck it in the corridor, and then this woman had come along from his studio and her mum, and they just started singing. So there's a lot of stuff like that goes on. Yeah.
Great. Good.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.